Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, brothers and sisters all over the continent and in the diaspora. I want to welcome you to our second module. This module, we are exploring the philosophy or the pedagogy behind our practice with children, our practice as parents and our practice as educators. So we're going to explore the driving force behind the way in which we work with children. I hope you enjoy this month, and I'd love to hear your feedback. This feeds into the identify part of the intent framework. Last month, we explored our goals for our children, and that's something that's ongoing. Although we've moved on to this topic, it doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to feed into what our goals are for young children. So last month, across our networks, our communities, and across our social media, we collated all of that information and distilled it into the themes that we've been discussing all month. And that helps us to identify the goals that we have for our children. But another side of that is the underpinning philosophy or identifying what that is. We're going to begin with a little word association game here. Okay. So on a piece of paper, in your phone, wherever, okay, I want you to time yourself for 2 minutes and write down every single word that you associate with the word child. Okay, and then do the same thing for every single word that you associate with the word parent, and then do the same thing for every single word that you associate with the word educator. So, for example, one of the words that you might choose is innocent for a child. Okay, and one of the things that you might choose, one of the words that you might choose for a parent is a protector of a child. And of course, parents and educators should be both protectors of children. But for an educator, the first word that might come to your mind might be to educate. Okay. So, yeah, write all of those words down and then we're going to discuss the ideas in the next slide. Why is it important that we identify and define the way that we see children, the way that we see parents, and the way that we see educators? Because all of these associations, whether we are aware or not, directly shape the way that we either practice with children as educators or raise our children as parents. Okay. Our fundamental views on our role as parents obviously shapes the way that we parent, and also in our fundamental view, if you're a parent, of the way in which educators are supposed to govern themselves or what it means to be an educator also shapes your expectations of your child's educators. Okay, and as educators, the way that you see children shapes the way that obviously you teach and educate children. The way that you see parents shapes the way that you interact with or partner with parents, and the way that you see yourself obviously shapes the way that you yourself practice. These perspectives also have broader implications, and they have broader implications on policy, they have broader indications on government policy, they have broader implications on school policy, national policy, the type of services that are provided for children in different areas, in different communities, in different countries even. So if you have a look at a country's policies for children, that really shows you how they see children and the way in which they prioritize children, but also within ourselves and within our communities. The way in which broader society, for example, sees children shapes what is seen as acceptable in children's media. So over the years, people have begun to comment on the kinds of things that are appropriate for children to be exposed to. Now, these conversations aren't new. These conversations have been happening since TVs were pretty much invented and were in every home. And when adverts became targeted for children directly. So it wasn't like TV was invented and then people all of a sudden or immediately started creating adverts and content for children. It took a while for content for children to be created. But now, what shapes what's seen as acceptable for children changes over time, right? So now there's a lot of conversations around the levels of stimulation that cartoons have in comparison to older cartoons and older shows for children. But also, it's seen as what is how children are also represented in the media, how Black children, specifically children from Africa, are represented in the media, constantly represented as these kind of poor children or poor children who have made it out, or the African child is going to come and kind of save the day type of thing. There's always a narrative around that child, and when it isn't, they're a secondary character. Now, all of these things again communicate things to our children, so we have to be conscious of how these things are being represented. What actually shapes our views? Okay, so we touched on media. Media, of course, has a direct impact or influence on how we see children. But also, let's talk about religion. how does religion or our religion shape the way that we view children? So, there's a lot of literature that suggests that Christian perspectives of children are often rooted in this. A child is born in sin and they need to be redeemed by Christ. And then, of course, in different fractions of Christianity, there are different debates around that. If a child isn't baptized by a certain age and they pass away, what happens then, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now, all of those things again have a direct impact on how we see children, how we view children, and that exact perspective of a child being born into sin and needing to be saved, feeds into the spare the rod, spoil the child narrative, which feeds into practices around disciplining children. Now, just as a random side note, the physical reprimanding of children, so beating, especially with objects, wasn't something that was widely practiced across the continent prior to colonization. It was seen as taboo to harm a child. And it was only through colonization that physical reprimands of children became standard practice. Social policy. How does social policy affect the way that we view children, or how does the way that we view children or positions of children in society affect social policy? It has a direct impact on social policy because the provisions that are made for children across different countries vary. And again, that's reflective of how children are positioned in that particular society. So if you have a look at your own country's social policy and see the provisions that are there for children, think about things like age of consent, think around things like marriage and child marriage, think around things like FGM, think around, other things like, the expectations of children to go to school and which children are expected to go to school, and the strategies that are put in place to get children into school, and gender, and all of these different things. All of these things are rooted in the way in which we fundamentally view children. And of course, this leads into education policy. And of course, this leads into things like education policy with regards to school places, with regards to placements, even basic things like how many children should be allowed in a classroom or the class sizes, versus the monitoring of said things, the actual provision of schools in different communities, especially in rural communities and things like that. Your parenting philosophy also is going to play a role in that. So, as a parent, the choices that you make about your child's school, or choice to not school them, to homeschool them, or something in between, where the places that you take your child to. So, I'm quite intentional. We're in the UK at the moment. We do go back and forth between the UK and Ghana, but I'm quite intentional about exposing my daughter to lots of different cultures and lots of different things. We do a lot of museums, we do a lot of libraries and things like that. But all of those things are based on specific things that I want her to cultivate, activities that she does. So she does swimming, and that again is based on specific skills that I want her to cultivate and the ways in which I want her brain to connect and stuff like that. But fundamentally, it's all rooted in the perspective that I want her to have as many options as possible, and then she can choose her own path. In summary, the way that we view children fundamentally impacts the way that we care for them and the way that we educate them, the way that we view children and the way that we view childhood. So, exploring all of this through an African lens. Of course, your own values and your own systems are going to be completely different, but I just want to kind of highlight our kind of beginning point. This is our starting point. African philosophy across the continent. There are, of course, lots of variations, but there are lots of similarities. And one of those similarities that you tend to see repeated in different cultures, slight different variations of it, is the importance of community. So, in African philosophy or in African schools of thought, the care and concern and the education of the child is the entire community's responsibility. Now, as we've become more individualized and more, especially African countries, are developing following the blueprint of the West, we are becoming a lot more individualized. So, what does it mean for the entire community to be responsible for the care and education of every child, right? And therefore, in those instances, decisions are made collectively. Now, have these always panned out to be the best choices, or at least what we would deem as the best choices, looking at it through a 2026 lens? No. But if the alternative hasn't produced consistently produced positive results. So the goal isn't to throw away our customs, and say, oh yeah, well, certain communities or certain people or certain individuals have abused these rights. The goal is to evolve it into actual sustainable policy. So, what does it mean for the care and education to be the responsibility of the entire community? And how can we enact that as we're planning for children? This gives everybody is held to account for the care and education of that child, for the well-being and the welfare of that particular child. It's everybody's collective responsibility. This means that there is a clear moral and cultural framework for each child. Now, of course, as we become increasingly multicultural, we have to factor all of those things in place. But these are things that we have to begin to interrogate. So I don't have the answers for you. We do have other members of the team who are going to talk about African philosophy and African spirituality in more depth. But I want to bring this to your awareness with the understanding that that's the reason why we're building this community. We're building this community to say, as a global community of African parents and educators, what is going to be our moral and accountability framework, and that's what we're working on. So each month they're exploring all of those individual themes, but they all feed into this. They're feeding into the framework, a clear moral and accountability framework for the care and education of all of our children. Now, the goal isn't to have it to be prescriptive, right? So it's going to be applicable regardless of your own kind of religious, I don't know, practices and affiliations or whatever. But the goal is to have these principles in place that kind of can guide our collective practice with children, ensuring that every single child is able to reach their full potential. What does this look like in practice, and what could this look like for us now? So, as you can see, the image on the screen is a very kind of modernized city, but also you have the cultural, the community practice of different ages coming together to learn. Now, if you look at some of the principles some of the principles that I had spoken about before, the idea that the community is responsible for the well-being of each child is featured in lots of different aspects, right? So one of the key things is going to be the way in which a child is named. So in some cultures, then the child is named after circumstances of their birth, right? There is a description of their birth circumstances. In other cultures like mine, one of the names that a child is given is after the day that they were born. Now, all of these indicators are ways in which previous societies or previous community ways in which our ancestors decided on indicators of a child's personality or destiny. However, it was broadly accepted that each child has come into the world with their own agenda, with their own destiny and their own purpose, and it is the responsibility of the entire community to nurture that. So, if the community fails in doing that, then the entire community is held to account. So, other ways in which children might have been named might be the lunar cycle, so how full or whether the moon was waxing or waning or full or new when the child was born. All of these things just show that there are indicators and specific orders to understanding the fact that each child has their own individuality and that the community should nurture that. So that perspective is the cornerstone of everything that we're doing. Right? We are operating under the assumption, under the belief of our ancestors that each child has come into the world with their own destiny, their own purpose, their own agenda, even so to speak. And it is the responsibility of parents and educators, aka the entire community, to care for and educate for that child. Now, as society evolves, of course, children are spending more and more time in school, and that's why we're focusing on this. We're focusing on building that community of parents and educators working together. So all of this underpins, everything that we do, and that's why our parenting and our parent and educator pathway are together. So we're exploring all of these ideas and sharing in dialogue like you would under the tree, like you would under your community tree, sharing in dialogue to share ideas and to establish frameworks for the care and education of our children. Again, our goal is to achieve genuine partnership, right, and seamless care between parents and educators for the child. We want children to have consistency. We want children to have love and support and to just continue to be nurtured, right? If parents and educators are on the same page, then all of our children will thrive. At least that's what the evidence suggests. For those of you on our educator pathway, especially those are the schools that we work with, one of the things that we're going to work on are your specific strategies for developing partnership with parents. Now, in different places, different cultures, different communities, different ethnic groups, different towns, etc., partnership with parents are it's a different battle for everybody. And so identifying the specific type of parents that you have will help you to develop those strategies. And then we do that through our consultation sessions. Okay, so you're going to work on that. But the importance of facilitating those genuine relationships are extremely important. The goal is that so that everybody is on the same page regarding the child's learning and development. So again, across the month, we're going to continue to collect the perspectives across our networks among our topic. And then later on, we're going to have a whole month dedicated to relationships where we're going to input anything that comes up between now and then about relationships into that. We're not going to only explore the relationships between parents and educators, but also our relationship with power and what that tells us or what that tells children about their position in the world. I'm really excited about that. And of course, we'll continue to feature all of that into our research. So I hope you really enjoy this month, and I'm going to leave you with a few questions. So I said a few questions, but actually what I meant was a few tasks. Okay. So you went through and you wrote down your keywords for child, parent, and educator. I want you to go through that list and have a clear definition for each of those phrases that you have chosen. Okay. So you might choose innocent. What does innocence actually mean and look like to you? Okay. And then I want you to make a second list about the implications on you. So again, if you had chosen the word innocent, what are the implications on you as a parent? If you have chosen the word innocent, what are the implications on you as an educator? Okay. So is your job to preserve that innocence, or is your job to prepare them for the world, or a bit of both? And what does that look like? The third thing is going to be your expectations for others. And others are going to be key people in that child's life. So if you are an educator, what are your expectations for parents? Okay. And that's something that you should communicate clearly. And if you are a parent, what are your expectations for educators? And again, that's something that should be communicated clearly. However, all of this is going to build into your manifesto. So because I value certain things about my child's safety, there are certain questions that I ask those who care for her. Okay. And those are just guiding principles. There are other things that other parents might care more about that it might seem like I don't care about. And that's fine, right? And so once you've done all of that, you're going to have a statement of intent. Okay, so we're going back to that intent aspect, a statement of intent. So I intend to, or I will preserve my child's innocence in this, right? In whichever way that looks like and whatever that looks like. And for me, if I think about my child's innocence, it's more about her not being exposed to certain things too early, but also her taking ownership over her own body and her own bodily autonomy. And that, deviates into lots of different things. So I don't I try not to force her to hug or kiss anybody. In fact, she doesn't hug or kiss anybody she doesn't want to. Um, I think where it does get a little bit complicated is if she doesn't want to talk to a particular family member and they've called to talk to her or something. But so now that I'm recording this, I'm becoming more aware that actually I should stop doing that. And that is why we do that. That's why we continue to reflect on our intentions for our children, and whether they are our children or the children that we're looking after, and how that shapes our broader policies and practices and the way that we operate with these children. All right. So I will see you in the next video. Where we will begin to break down some of these concepts. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.